We are now recording.
Okay, and I guess it's 6 o'clock, so we can go ahead and if he joins, we'll bring him on board at that time, I guess. So we'll call the meeting to order then for 6 o'clock. Thank you for signing in and doing it the new method, the new way, I guess. So welcome to the fourth meeting of the Vibrancy, the Renewable Energy Vibrancy Fund Advisory Committee. It's a mouthful. As you're aware, this meeting is open for public viewing and will be recorded and posted onto the township website. Please remember to keep your mics muted when you're not speaking. If you wish to speak, raise your hand, or the chair will acknowledge you. If you're a committee member with no video, please use the chat button or raise your hand feature and indicate you wish to speak and during voting. And our deputy clerk keeps an eye on that as well. So if I miss something, she can give me the nudge. Also, if a member loses connection, just send an email to Brandy if you can. If you have to leave the meeting, just let us know, and that way we can ensure that we have a quorum. So with that, we'll move ahead. So the first item on the agenda is the adoption of the agenda. Just to double check, no additions or deletions from staff, and
no.
And I don't believe there is any from the members either. Am I correct? Okay, so if we could just get a recommendation.
I'll move that.
Moved by Diane Pierce, seconded by Joan. Thank you. And I'll call the question. All in favor? Now,
I don't know where the raise hand function is, but raise hand.
okay, that works too.
I
Emotion
don't
is
know where
bad.
the chat button either. I'm looking though.
Okay. Well, I mean, being in a committee, we are fairly relaxed anyway. We try to follow the rules enough, but yes, Brandy.
Sorry, I'm just looking for the chat function as well, and the raise hand. I don't know if it's the setup on the meeting type, but I am not seeing either option for chat or raise hand. So if James just wants to unmute when he's voting, or to try and get your attention, if that's acceptable.
Does that work okay for you, James?
Yep, as long as you can see when I unmute, should be good.
I can see when you unmute, and you can just go ahead and if we're doing a vote or you want to speak, just unmute and we'll bring you in at the first opportunity then. That would be good.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks.
Okay, perfect. We want to make sure everybody's got an opportunity. So the second item is the declaration of pecuniary interest. Does anyone have any declaration at this time? And hearing none. The minutes and notes from the previous meetings, confirmation of the minutes of the third session Renewable Energy Vibrancy Fund Advisory Committee on January 16, 2020. They were attached with our package. Did anyone notice any errors or omissions? Everything looked okay. Okay. Could we just have a motion then to the recommendation is that the minutes from the January 16, 2020 Renewable Energy Vibrancy Fund Committee be approved as circulated. There are no amendments, so just as circulated.
I'll make that motion.
Moved by Joan, thank you. Seconded by James.
Yeah, I can second it.
Okay, thank you. And I'll call the question. All in favor?
Yep.
Find my own, I have to find my own camera here again. Okay, motion passed. Thank you. So we move into reports. So the first report is 5.1, which is basically bringing back the discussion that was at council with council's recommendations and a recommendation with the report. Does anyone have any questions regarding this? And it, okay, I don't see any questions. Being that we're in a meeting, if we want to have a discussion on it, I think we can go ahead and do that before we get a motion on the floor. Rather, it's different than what the normal procedure is, but in this setting, I think it's good to have the discussion and then we can have a full recommendation. So is there anyone that has any discussion they want to bring up on this? Seeing none? Yes, Diane.
Well, I'm not quite sure how the chair wants to proceed with this. Obviously, council sent it back to us for further thought
Yes.
and discussion. So I'm not sure. How would you like to handle this? How?
Now, the way we set up the agenda was, you can see in section 6, we actually go through each of the items that council wanted us to bring back. So in this setting, we can, receive the recommendation was that the report be received. The minutes of the January 16, 2020, that's already been approved. And that the committee discussed the comments provided by council under section 6 of the committee agenda. So the 5 items we'll do under number 6. So yes, Diane.
Okay, sorry, thank you for pointing that out. I will move to receive council's report.
Thank
for
you.
Consideration.
For consideration, thank you. And a seconder? Joan?
All right.
Any further discussion before I call the vote? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor?
Yep.
Motion is passed. So my kitchen table isn't big enough to be a good sized desk, I guess. So moving on to reporting from council, 6.1. Was the name of the proposed funding streams be changed for clarity? So did anyone have any suggestions, or Joan?
My suggestion was for the first part to be called the Green Grant Program, and the second part be Vibrancy Funds, to change the names to be more different than we had in the beginning.
So the Vibrancy Fund would be the same. That one wouldn't change. The other, it would be
Correct.
the community grant.
The
fund that
grant would be
change?
the Green Grant Program.
Okay, any other suggestions or discussion on that? I'm just making sure I find what the the items that were under the community grant funding stream that we presented was community services, arts, culture, heritage, agriculture, rural affairs, social services, community events, parades, tourism, economic development, community beautification, environmental and green projects, supporting youth and seniors, and community social assistance, as well as disaster relief. Those were sort of the subheadings we had under that. So yes, Diane.
I kind of had a slightly different suggestion than Jones, and I thought that we could almost leave the community grant funding stream name as it is, because all of those, I still think it fits, but just call it the community fund. And then using what's being used a lot these days for the Vibrancy funding stream, the Build Back Better Fund.
Oh,
Maybe it's a bit trite. I mean, maybe it's becoming overused. I'm sure there's a better one than that, but that's a suggestion.
and just a little, James, did you have any suggestions or?
Those sound like they would be okay. Like I kind of like the community fund for the first one, because that seems to hit a lot of those headings for the like it matches what it's doing.
Mhm.
And maybe the second one, if we could incorporate like the green funding, because this all came from green projects, like the money. So that one could maybe be the green fund, or the renewable energy. I don't know, something or other fund. If anyone has any other ideas, I don't know. That's all I got.
Yes, Joan.
It's just the first one is actually the grant. So I think it should have grant in the title of the first program. That's all.
And part of my, I'll share some of my thoughts then. I guess what I see is if we just call it a green grant, although it's coming from green energy, the funds are coming from green energy, it makes it sound like the grant is only for green projects, which some of them are, but then we've also got the tourism and community assistance and things like that in there. I'm not sure if it would make a misunderstanding when people just looked at the heading and thought that what they wanted to do wouldn't be valid to it. The Vibrancy funding, Diane, yours was Build Back. Sorry, could you just repeat what it was? It was Build Back?
Build Back Better.
Build Back Better. That's the word I was missing.
I wonder, I like Joan's idea of acknowledging that these funds are coming from green energy projects. I just don't know how that could be reflected without being confusing, as you've suggested, Jim. But it would be kind of nice if it could be reworded in such a way that it did that.
I could chime in for a second.
Yes.
Renewable Energy Benefit Fund. Would that be kind of in that neighborhood, maybe?
Were you thinking for what we were calling the Vibrancy Fund now to be called that, or the Community Grant Fund?
Community grant, I think, matches that good.
Yeah.
And then the
Yeah.
Renewable Energy Benefit Fund, that kind of says that the money's coming from the renewable projects a little bit, I think.
Yes, Joan?
I like that idea.
I think it's,
Yes, go ahead, Diane.
I do too. It probably reflects, it's more accurate than Vibrancy Fund in a way.
Mhm.
It kind of says what it is.
Yeah, the Vibrancy funding, it kind of fit, but I was always thinking it would be nice to have a different term. And this actually, I'm like you, I kind of like that. The Community Grant Fund, I think that does sort of sum up what it is. It's in a nutshell, it's the Vibrancy Fund that I was struggling with a new name, and Renewable Energy Benefit Fund.
If it would help, I would make a motion to rename those two funds, the Renewable Energy Benefit Fund. That was the one that we were calling the Vibrancy Funding Stream before. And that the Community Grant Funding Stream be called the Community Grant Fund.
Okay, so moved. Seconder,
Yeah, I can second, or anybody.
James? Okay. Any other discussion or questions before we call the vote? And seeing none, I'll call the vote. Everyone in favor?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you. Motion is carried. Very good. Okay. So the next item is 6.2. The amount of the funds set aside be increased to ensure funds into perpetuity is the way that it was written. The deputy treasurer added, got to find my copy, there's a chart in our package that expanded on the scenarios that were provided before. And it sort of, basically it just gave a lot more choices, so everyone can take a look, and we were looking, the original one was to set aside to bank 15%, which would have been the top scenario. And then it goes down to what, the way I see it, if we spend 25% and bank 75%, the interest would maintain the same amount of money available, it basically into perpetuity. Now I guess it actually says in perpetuity, but we can have a discussion on how we want to handle this. Is there, Phil, is there anything else that you wanted to add to this?
Just speak to it. Yeah. So just so everyone knows, there's obviously assumptions that we have to make when modeling this. The key assumption in this chart is a deposit interest rate of an average deposit interest rate of 1.5% is what we would be earning in interest. And right now during the pandemic, we're down to about a 0.7% deposit interest rate in our banks. Prior to the pandemic, though, we were at about 2.25, 2.3. So, I mean, it is just a projection. It's an estimate, but yeah, the way you're reading it is right. So the 75% bank scenario is basically perpetuity forever. You could basically spend $160,000 a year out of the 635 forever, because that the 11 million in the bank after 20 years would be earning enough interest, would basically be earning $160,000 in interest. So that's why it goes forever. And then there's all the other scenarios there, what you want to call perpetuity. There's other scenarios there where you see it stretches 20 years out to like 60 years to 100 years. what is perpetuity. So that's basically it. And then the model was basically if under the spending scenario, that's what we would keep spending after the 20 years. And that gives you so you can see how the 50-50 example would be you spend 317,000 a year, and we could basically do this for 48 years instead of the 20. So that's kind of the chart, but in a nutshell.
So Phil, just a quick question. So this is maintaining the spending rate straight, like after the income ends.
Yes, yeah. So the
But-
income's done after 20 years. Yeah.
So perpetuity could also be scale back the spending after the income ends, have the interest and either spend the interest or spend a portion of what's banked and the interest to stretch it further. That I'm just
Yep.
saying that's another option that we could look at
Yep,
to stretch.
for sure.
So,
Yeah, so
Okay.
the one column there that has the bank balance after 20 years, that would be the projected balance in the bank with the interest that's earned for the 20 years. And at that time, you could really make a decision at that time saying, even if you bank 25, okay, we have about 3.7 million after 20 years, then you could really decide how long you want to stretch that out. You could adjust it for sure.
okay. Okay. Because yeah, I just thought of that just before the meeting. I thought that was another option we could have looked at. And so like you did, I thought, well, the middle of the road is 50-50. So I just did that and took a look at it. And basically interest alone would be somewhere around $95,000 a year. And then like that, I was just trying to get in my own head how much money would be there if in interest alone. So yes, Diane.
Yes, I understand the need to provide for the future, but I guess I wonder what the rationale is for not allowing more of it to be used sooner rather than later, given that the project is intended to last. I mean, the projects are intended to have a lifespan of 20 years. We know that it will probably be longer than that, but I guess I don't see a lot of benefit in going beyond, say a 30-year frame. I just think that there are a lot of demands for that money now. And I wonder why we are now living with those projects. Why would the community that's currently living with those projects not benefit sooner rather than later? I understand you put something aside for the future, but anyway, that's my thought. And I wondered what the rationale is for even considering going even beyond 30 years.
And if memory serves me correct, I can try to briefly sum up what the discussion was at council.
Okay.
And what they were looking at was after 20 years of having the money available, after that, people are going to be accustomed to having that money available to be able to apply to. So if the money all of a sudden isn't available, are they going to want it to be done through taxes or something to be able to keep it going? Or will the council today have to say, sorry, the money's not here, not coming in any longer, so we don't have it any longer. So I think that was part of it, is that way it could be more of a legacy fund, not necessarily into perpetuity, but a legacy fund that would just carry on afterwards as long as possible. That's my summation on it. I may not be speaking for everyone that spoke, but that was the gist of it for
Thank you.
me.
Thanks.
Yes, Joan.
I agree with Diane. I think that I think that it should be used now, as we discussed. And I think that our percentages that we discussed and presented to council was a good idea. That's all.
Okay. And I mean, they sent it back. I guess they kind of directly said increased into perpetuity. There's a couple options we can do. We can look at, I know Joan, you've stated that your preference is for it to stay the way it is. Diane, it sounded like was similar to that, maybe a little flexible. It's the committee's decision. We can take back to council whatever the committee decides. The final, without sounding, without this sounding bad, the final decision is council. So I mean, if we send it back with no change, they may accept it, or they may say, no, we're going to set whatever. I can't guess what they would do. I'm one member. I'll speak to it. I'll relay as much as I can that the committee, how they feel, and it's still a council decision. So I mean, I'm just being very clear on once we make the decision how it goes, which I know Diane is very familiar with, but I just want to make sure everyone is.
If I
James,
could
did
chime
you have something?
Yeah, so I was probably the member of this committee pushing for more saving than the rest, but I think the 75% might be a little extreme.
Yep. Okay.
So I kind of like I totally see what the council's saying, and I would agree, like with their sentiments. Perhaps an idea could be structuring the fund slightly differently. So like, how do I put this? Projects that we fund through this money, we would have to do the math on it and keep to a certain ratio of projects that are one-time expense, as opposed to projects that are perhaps a big capital expenditure, and then you have upkeep and maintenance and things for, well, potentially forever afterwards, right? Say if you were to build a building or something like that, you would have maintenance fees and staffing and all that kind of stuff afterwards. So I think it kind of gets back to what we want to spend this money on. If you want to build like a big building with it, well, you may have to save a greater amount in order to fund that into the future. Whereas if you're going to spend it on, say, parades or something, not that we need that much money's worth of parades every year, but, or a heck of a fireworks show maybe or something. Like it's just a one-time expense, but there's no ongoing upkeep with that. So maybe we should, I know we kind of aren't the ones like spending the money directly or anything. We're just making recommendations on how to structure everything. But maybe that's something we should discuss or put a question to them as to how specific they want us to get with this. Like, and maybe we can do some math and figure out a good compromise. So X number of percent goes to one-time projects, X number of percent goes to potentially capital projects with ongoing fees. So I don't know. That's just my thought. I think in my original proposal, I had like 25% being saved to keep the programs and stuff going. But yeah, with these interest rates nowadays, like some countries are headed negative, right? So you never know where that's going.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's my thoughts anyway.
Okay. And you touched on a good point there, where if there's capital projects that this money funds, just about the time the money stops is when the repairs will probably start. So that's something to look down the road too. Whether we intend to or not, it could be a tax burden in the future just with repairs and upkeep of what happens here. So Yes, Diane.
If I may, there's another way of looking at that. I mean, that's just good planning on behalf of council as managing an asset that they would not have had otherwise. So, I think we can rely on council to find a way to pick that up. And I wouldn't mind changing, going a little bit longer, changing that ratio somewhat. But I would not want it to go to bank more than 25% at all. I think that's kind of the maximum. That gives us, well, or I don't know, maybe 30, but I really kind of feel that giving a 28-year time frame is not unreasonable. 30 at the absolute maximum.
Okay. Okay, so that's, and you're right, Diane, to what I was saying with repairs, and that if the money isn't there out of this, it is up to council to find the money and plan for it accordingly. And that can, some of that thought could be put into when the money is awarded to the recipients. Council's going to have to realize that if they award money for things that are going to need maintenance, we know who will be ultimately doing the repairs in the future. So, so you'd mentioned, now you'd mentioned 30 years, which was 30%, and then you said about 20, your max would be 25% banking. I just want to make sure I'm not nitpicking. I just want to make sure I'm looking at the right line.
You're just reflecting my lack of decision, Jim.
Sorry.
No,
thought,
you were quite accurate with that.
If we narrow it down to a motion, then we want to make sure the motion is clear, and we want to make sure that the members are clear when they're voting on it. That's all. Yes, Bill.
Just want to be clear that those are just estimates. That doesn't mean it's for sure 28 years. Just so.
Yes, with these interest rates, we'd be looking at 20 years if we're lucky.
Banking 25 would put it in the ballpark of what Diane's speaking as an estimate. I think that's reasonable.
Yeah.
To go and flip it between the two.
Yeah.
It's a nice round number.
Okay. While you're thinking of that, Joan's got do you want me to go to Joan, Diane, and we can come back?
Oh, sure. Yes, I'll
rather than put you on the spot. Yes, Joan.
Hi. So if you're taking 25, that is 25 to be set aside, 15 for green or for the grant money, and 60 for the renewable energy benefit funds. Is that the way you're thinking about it?
Well, whatever we set here, then the percentage that we're spending would have to, when we set those other percentages, it was 15% was going into savings. So the other 85% was split up. So and just using the example of 75, 25, 25% would go in the bank. So the 75% that we were going to be spending, we would have to set the percentages there. So it still comes out to 100. Yes.
So are you taking away from the benefit fund or the grant money if you're adding it to the long-term banking money?
That recommendation will come from this committee. Because once we're the ones that set the original ones. And so if we're changing the amount of money that's being spent, then when we go back with our recommendation for the spending, we can modify the ratio of spending as well. So I think before it was 15, 15, and 70. So if we go 25 banked, then the other 75, we can split that up and recommend to council however we want. And it's up to council do it, but that's, as long as it comes to 100% at the end of the day, then we've got a valid recommendation back. Yes, Diane?
So I have a question just for clarification, just to make sure I understand what you're saying. So basically, and this is how I understood it to be as well. So the decision that we make on this would apply to each of the, however it's distributed. So each of those funds, would then, the same thing would apply to it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
and I think that makes sense, although what you're saying makes sense also, because obviously a community grant fund doesn't have the same requirement for long-term maintenance that capital projects would have, for example.
Yes, and just keeping in mind too, that item 6.4 is, they wanted us to consider commitments for like multi-year projects. So even if there's not as much money available, if we say, okay, if somebody wants to do something and it's a large project, so we would give so many dollars, and we'll do that up to 4 or 5 years, the sum total might be significant enough to make that project still happen as well. But so I guess my first thought was, if we set the percentage that we're saving and that we're spending, then everything else will fall out of that, because then we know the value that we're going to be working with. So is there any further discussion, or does somebody have a motion they would like to make, or?
So I'm just doing a few quick numbers here.
Good.
So if we save 25, that's around 158,000 a year. And then the community grant, it was 15% before?
Yes, 15%.
So that's about 95,000 a year for that. And then so that leaves for the renewable energy roughly 381. Still pretty substantial. So that's still a fairly substantial amount of money to each fund. And with our renamings of the funds, I feel like that's it's a little more implied what they're for. So the grants, I would assume, would be one-time deals. So say like a fireworks show, like that's a good example, or a gardening club is getting together doing a thing, or putting on a parade or whatever. That's like one-time shot. And then you got 381 for potential other things that were covered under the other fund. So that's still a fairly sizable chunk of change to do whatever you want with. I don't know. That's at community grant at 15%, and then renewable energy benefit fund at 60%, and then we're banking the 25. So,
okay.
I don't know. How does everybody else feel about those numbers?
I'll look to the committee, since I'm only the chair here.
I think you should make that motion, Jim. James, I'm sorry, James.
Are you willing to make that motion, James?
Okay, if you guys are happy with those numbers, I'll make the motion.
Okay.
So basically, it's just for clarification, it's the blue one on the sheet. So spend 75, bank 25, and that would then flow into the other.
Yes. And Phil, just before we get a mover, you know what the intent is here. So like James has given numbers, we can just make sure the math all works.
Yeah, those were just
outside
rough.
of a meeting.
Those were just rough.
Yeah, I heard 15, 60, and 25, right? That adds up to 100. You should be good.
So in around those numbers work and we can, I just wanted to make sure that, because you're going to be the one on that end of it. I'm not doing the math during a meeting, so sorry. Okay, so that's so moved. Thank you, James. Do we have a seconder for that motion?
I'll second it.
Diane? And yes, Brandy?
So just to clarify, the motion is that 25% be banked, 75% be spent, and within that 15% is used for the community grant stream and 60% is used for the renewable energy stream.
That's correct, right, James?
Yep. Yeah, that's all good.
Okay. Okay, Brandy? Perfect. Phil?
Sorry, Brandy, just my OCD math. It's important when you when you write that down, it's not 15% of the 75, it's 15% of the 100, because those are different things. Just want to make sure that's clearly written that way.
Okay. By the grin on her face, I think we're good. Okay. Yes, Diane?
I wondered if Phil would just clarify that again, just.
Right, so really we're out of the 100%, 15 is being spent on the, I forget what we've called it now. 60 on the renewable, 25 is being banked, which adds up to 100% overall.
And if we keep it with the percentages, then if the income is a little up or a little down, the math still works.
Right, yeah, that's especially important with the wind electric portion. It's not a fixed income. It does depend on if a windmill goes down and this and that, but it
Depends
should
on the
roughly,
amount of
should be-
electricity sold.
Yeah.
Okay, Diane, did that clarify the question
It
then?
does, thank you.
Thanks. Good. Okay. Any other discussion on the motion then of 25% banked and the remainder? Already I've lost it. What was it? 16 and 15, I believe it was, or 60 and 15. Not seeing discussion. I'll call the question. All in favor?
Yep.
Okay. Motion is passed. Okay, so 6.3. The application process includes submissions available twice a year and the advisory commission. Okay, there's not a whole lot of discussion on that one, I don't think. It's just we recommended that it was once a year and they said council recommends twice a year. It'll be the same amount of money. It's just how many times we do the paperwork, I guess. Does anyone have any questions or discussion? Diane? Go ahead, Diane.
I don't see a problem with that, really. It's just a process.
Yeah, it's just, that's the way I see it. It's just a matter of the paperwork being done twice a year then. And in some ways it might be good for some of the groups that either don't realize the funds are available, or if the application has to be in, say, for December, but they don't, their function doesn't go until August, they might not realize they've missed it. So it might have its benefits. So Joan, go ahead.
I agree. I think there's no problem with that.
Okay, perfect. Phil, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I was just wondering with the multi-year submission availability, and I can't remember back to the conversation, is the thought that during the year, if we earmark a certain amount of money for a pool of projects, would we hold some back for the second submissions? Or if enough come in on the first wave and then there's nothing left for the second date of submissions? Has there been thought given to that sort of thing?
The way I guess
Just
that
Putting it
can
out
be
there.
that can be part of the recommendation that we provide. I guess I made the assumption that it would be sort of a 50-50 split, so that there was always money for the second one. It wasn't just first come, first serve, but that's a discussion that can be had to go back with if we want to make a recommendation back.
Yeah, I'm good with that, and I agree with Phil too. That's a very good point.
Joan?
Oh,
Oh, sorry.
I agree with that as well. That's a
Okay.
good point. I didn't think about that.
yeah, I hadn't
Yeah.
thought of that either. I think if that's very clear, then people will be able to, and again, I guess it's going to depend if we're actually using it for projects that have a time limit on them. We'll have to make sure that it can be done in such a way that the funds are dispensed as when they're needed. But I guess if the people who are submitting applications understand that there'll be a set amount of money available then, and I guess if it's not all applied for, then it would possibly flow into the second group. I would think that that would be a reasonable way of doing it, but yeah, I think that has merit.
Brandy, just, I wanted to make sure, did you catch that last part that Diane said, that if all of the funds aren't used during one application process, the funds would automatically be held for the next application to be included? Okay, thank
Yeah.
you. That's a good point, Diane. That's why I wanted to make sure we caught it. Yes, Phil?
And just to add on Diane's point, I would probably add wording whenever they get around to the proper wording to also say that a fund unspent would roll over into the potential pool of spending for the next year as well.
Yes.
That it would stay within that same pool. Doesn't go back into the general pool to then be split up again, if that's the intent, but from year to year as well.
I guess that's kind of what I made the assumption that's the way.
Can't assume, Jim.
But if we don't write it down, then nobody else knows but us.
Yeah.
So is that what the committee was thinking as well, that what isn't used in one year would go into the next year to be added with the next allotment?
I would say yes, but I would also give them the option to bank it if they're I don't know, say interest rates hit like 0.1% or something, they could bank a little extra if it's unspent. But yeah, rolling over into the next year's funds is a good idea as well. I'd just like to give them the option to do whatever they want. They can either roll it over or bank it, depending on the times.
And I think once the policy is written and it's starting to go, I think it's almost going to be a living document a little bit, where we're going to have lessons learned and we'll be able to come back and tweak it a little bit. So I think that might be something that we realize the committee of the day could recommend to council. We do have a large amount sitting here that we haven't dispersed, so let's bank it and put it further out. Or they can look at raising the limits and awarding bigger projects. So yes, I agree, James. That's good. Any other discussion on that then? And if not, would someone like to make a motion on, where are we here? So it's twice a year. What was our discussion? Diane, you looking to make a motion? Sorry, I thought you were moving, and I thought you were trying to get my attention.
I was giving someone else an opportunity. I was sitting back.
Okay.
But I'm
Okay.
happy to move it if no one else wants to.
Okay, I'll just put it out to the floor then. Anyone want to make a motion on this?
I can make it or second it.
Okay. Go ahead if you'd like. James?
Okay, so we're rolling out. Well, we are going for a twice a year disbursement potentially, and any unused funds can be rolled over into the next year's, well, next terms. How would you call that? Next terms or next year's funds or could be banked.
Okay,
Depending on whatever the committee decides.
and did you want to, not to lead the motion, but did you want to include, we had a discussion on this 50-50 split
Yes, yes.
for each per year?
I'd forgotten that. Good call.
Okay, just wanted to make sure that we, if it was intended, that it was added. So the motion's made. Yes, Diane?
Just for clarification, I think if I'm correct, I just want to make sure because I'm happy to second James's motion if I understand it. So basically it's that there will be, applications will be taken twice a year, and 50% of the funds will be allocated to each application period. And any funds that are not allocated in the first round will be rolled over to the second round, and any that are not allocated in that year will be rolled over to the following year.
Correct. That's the way I heard it. Is that correct, James? Was that your intent?
Yeah, that's just much better said.
Then I will second that.
Perfect. Seconded by Diane. Any further discussion or questions on the motion on the floor then? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Everyone in favor?
Yep.
Motion is carried. Good. 6.4, consider multi-year commitments to fund projects, example, $100,000 for 5 years. Yes, Diane?
Maybe I'm missing something. I think I'm looking at the wrong sheet of paper, but I was looking at the policy review. Timelines should not be included. Council should be able to review as required. Was that not an item for discussion? Or is that done?
I guess it's not on the agenda, but yes, that was an item that was, and I guess I interpreted that was a statement and not coming back, but we can. Well,
Yeah, I'm on page 3 of that packet. I was reading that too.
of the
I think
minutes.
it's fair enough.
Did you want to have a discussion on that, Diane, then?
Yes, I would, because I think if the policy doesn't have a timeline, I mean, it could be changed at any time, and that doesn't give any security to it at all, unless the intent is that it would just be a policy that would, well, I don't know. I still would like to see a timeline set for it. It could be shorter than that, or it could be longer. It's just that I think it's important if you have, for the community to know that if there's a policy, that it has some longevity, for lack of a better word, or not,
Okay,
rather than just being ad hoc.
yes, and I think if I remember correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, when we set those times, we kind of thought it should take a few years to make sure that it's working and for lessons learned, and then it could be reviewed. And that's why we put the minimum 3. And then we said, really, we shouldn't let it go to perpetuity. So we wanted to set an upper limit as well. And I think if I remember correctly, some of the discussion at council was, it wasn't so much the maximum or no later than 5 years, it was the minimum, in that if we go 1 year and we find out there's concerns, they didn't want to be held to go 2 more years and not be able to work on it. And that's the way if I remember correctly, that was the discussion at council. So does that work for you? That sets an upper limit of every 5 years it should be reviewed.
That makes sense to me.
Yeah, I think that it makes sense to me when you explain it, and that's why I wanted to know what the rationale was behind it. But yeah, I think that can make sense.
So the way when we write the policy, I guess what I envisioned is we would just leave that every 3 years out. And the comment there, we could work into the policy that, a council review of the policy would be a maximum of every 5 years. Something along those lines, worded nicely, but that's the gist of it. And that way at any time during that 5 years, but it wouldn't go past. Yes, Diane?
And it doesn't preclude council, if there are real problems, obviously council can open it up and do what needs to be done. But I think there should be some process when that happens. So it's not just so the work that's gone into setting the policy isn't just not recognized. I don't mean recognized, but has no value really because it could be changed anytime. But I understand totally if there are problems, the sooner the problems are fixed, the better.
You're okay. You just touched on something there then. Again, another assumption that I had, but maybe it's not what the intent of the committee is. I assume that the committee of the day would review it first and then make a recommendation to council, because the committee of the day would be the ones that were doing the work with the applications, right? So they would know what was working and what wasn't. So that's something that we could add into the policy as well, as that the committee would do a review a maximum of every 5 years for recommendations to go to council. And that way, that kind of addresses what you were mentioning, maybe Diane, where it's not just change just for the sake of change. Yes, Joan?
I agree with the committee reviewing it or bringing to the attention to the council if there's a problem that something's not working.
Okay. And if it works for the committee, because we're looking at and 6.4, when we're looking at multi-year funding projects, we can just add this maybe to it, Brandy, that the multi-year or the multi-year commitment and review timelines. And we'll say that it all ties in with multi-year work. So if everyone is in agreement with that, then we can look at the multi-year projects and then make a motion for everything at once. Does that work for the committee?
Yep.
Okay. So we've kind of I think we've kind of figured out how we want the review to be done. So multi-year projects, does anyone have a concern with including in the policy to be able to award multi-year projects, which would be committing the next allotment? You'd be committing multi-year allotments then, basically sort of like a pre-budget approval, knowing that the money wouldn't be available the next time. So I'll just put it out to the committee if anyone has any discussion on that. And also, there's an example here of like 10,000 for 5 years. Do we want to set limits like that or just leave it? It'd be nice to have limits, because we don't know who's going to be doing this in 5 years or 10 years from now. So the more guidance we can give, the better it would be, I think.
Yeah. I that's one thing I had assumed, I guess, was that you could do multi-year commitments off of our wording, but I guess it wasn't really in there specifically. But I do agree with the setting a limit, because it's not potentially fair to the next year or several years applicants if like they blow all the money on one project, right? Then nobody else gets a crack at it. So it should probably be a percentage as well, just to keep the math easier, the numbers easy in case there's fluctuations in income.
Good point. Okay. Joan, go ahead.
I just think that maybe the next point being discussed may influence the 6.4 for future projects. I just, we don't really know what the projects are going to be for at this point. So to limit it, I don't really agree with that.
With limiting the number of years or the dollar value or both?
Both, until you know what this is going towards. It's hard to say how it should be
Oh,
handled.
because, okay, so the next item, okay, because you're not sure what the allotment will be for, like if there's no reserve for strictly Amherst Island, you mean? Sorry, you're muted, Joan.
Sorry, yes, that's what I am saying.
Okay. Okay, I had an idea for being able to maybe achieve what we were trying to anyway, just in a different way for number 5, but you're right, that could, well, even if it's done township wide, just everything was equal township wide. We could still set the limits because it wouldn't matter if it was a project like it, and I'm just using this example again, 10,000 for 5 years. So if that would be for everybody in the township. So with the amount of money that's coming, we could probably you could award a few of those basically at the same time and probably still not go over your spending limit for that application period.
If I can chime in here.
Yeah.
I get what Joan's saying. I think that like that's one thing I've kind of struggled with through this whole process, because I like to start at the end and then work backwards. So know what you're going to do and then work backwards on how to get there. So we're kind of working the other way, trying to plan to make it as flexible as possible for whatever may come. So we have the 2 different types of funds. So to me, a grant probably isn't funding multi-year projects at all. I don't know if I'm incorrect in assuming that, but to me, grants are kind of one-shot deals. And the Renewable Energy Benefit Fund, that's a much bigger fund. But to me, that would be what you would be funding a multi-year project out of, more than likely. And as far as limits, like, again, it really depends on what you're planning on doing with it. If you were to say no more than, I don't know, like 50% on one project or 60% on one project over multi years, that whittles it down quite a bit, but that's still like, I don't know, 100 and like 80 grand ish or a year that you could be doing. Like, it's still quite a bit of money per year on a project that you could have access to. So like if you went as an upper limit of like 50% or something, that's still quite a bit of money to one project. But maybe there should be some wording in there that if you do fund a multi-year project like that, that the total of all multi-year projects maybe can't exceed 50 or 60% of your per year fund like income, if that makes sense. That way,
Yes.
you're not just using 2 like big ones.
Yeah. Okay. Diane, go ahead.
I like what James is saying. I guess I think that there should be I think that multi-year projects should be allowed, but I also agree with what Joan is saying, and really what I think we all probably feel is there should be an allowance for it, but I think at this point, it's pretty hard to, I think they would be very, they would be, they would not be minor projects, obviously. And obviously, if say, just use an example, say there is some sort of a facility planned, and I really hesitate to even mention a possible type of project, but for the sake of discussion, you would need to know if you were supporting that, and it would be most, chances are good it would be council doing it, that there is an ongoing plan that you might not get all of the money for it in year one, but you would know that there is money coming forward for that in, say, 5 years or whatever. So I think that the multi-year projects should be allowed. I wonder if it's too soon to set exactly what that would look like. It would be really a problem if a major project that was done in phases could get money for phase one, but then not have money for phase two or subsequent phases. Am I making any sense? You're looking a bit quizzical, Jim.
No, I'm trying to think it through all. I'm trying to picture what could go wrong so we can try and not allow that to happen. And I guess the downside to not having a limit would be if we put it out for the first application and people come in asking for multi-year funding and upwards limit to what's available, then the committee is going to have to decide which one is more viable. Or say you'll get a fraction of it, which will ultimately probably not allow the project to proceed. And I guess that's where I'm thinking, if we're clear on either, like dollar values or percentages, either one, and a number of years, then when the proposal's coming in with the request, they can plan for it, and so can we, and it would probably stop. It would probably eliminate the committee sitting there looking at, let's say they have 3 proposals. If we don't have any limits, they say, okay, I've got this proposal and I want to build this, and I want $150,000 for the next 20 years. And that's extreme. I get that. But if we leave it wide open, that's what we could get. So then the committee has to look and say, do I commit this for 20 years for the life of this policy? Or do we say no and the project doesn't proceed? And so I'm just trying to cut that off at the pass as well. Yes, Joan?
I think we're ahead of ourselves trying to make that. That might be a decision that could come after there's more decisions been made.
Okay, so here's another option then. What if, yes, Diane? Go ahead, Diane.
I agree with Joan. I think we understand the principle. I think there's good reasons for it, but I think it's a topic that we should defer to a future meeting.
And that's what I was just going to suggest.
And I would make that motion.
Okay. So,
okay.
So just so we have a timeline on that, Diane, do you want to defer it until the draft policy is presented? Because
sure.
the rest of the answers, we'd have the rest of the answers then to be able to make a decision.
Yes, I'll make that motion.
Okay. Do we have a seconder for deferral of this item until the draft policy comes? Joan, seconder. And on deferrals, there's no discussion, technically. So I'll call the question. All in favor?
Sure.
Thank you. Motion passed. Okay, Brandy, you got that okay?
Yeah, I did, but in that discussion, you guys had discussed council reviewing the policy. So if you want to make a separate motion for that, how often council reviews the policy?
or we can leave it the way it is. And when it comes back with the draft policy, there's been a bit of a discussion. So we have an idea of what we were looking at. When it comes back, we can deal with both items when the draft policy comes back.
Okay, so I'll have both items deferred.
Does that work for the mover and seconder? Was that the intent of the motion? Okay, I'm seeing nods. So,
Thank you.
Yes.
okay, thank you. Good catch, Brandy. Thank you. It's amazing, eh? Staff always makes. I'm glad they catch us when I miss stuff. So moving
That's
to,
very important.
it is. I always say if I look good, there's somebody in staff that made me that way. 6.5, first 5 years of funding on Amherst Island, consider other options to achieve same goal. Yes, Joan?
I was very disappointed with this question, obviously. I would like to know how or why council has, with Ward 3 getting the 5 years, they don't agree with Ward 1 getting it for the first 5 years. I was just wondering if somebody could explain that to me.
I can try to relay some of the discussion, which hopefully will bring you up to speed of at least what the thought process was. The discussion that I recall is that the Samsung agreement clearly stated it. So they're basically following what they have to follow for that agreement. Because it wasn't in the Amherst Island turbine agreement, they were leaving it open. So that's where it came from, is basically they were just following the agreements to the letter of what was written. I know there's disappointment, and so, okay, Diane, I gave a bit of a synopsis of what the discussion was. Go ahead, Diane.
And which we appreciate, I guess, because I agree with Joan, but the Wind Electric Fund does say, the Wind Electric Agreement does say, whereas the proponent has agreed to make certain financial contributions to the township, community benefit contributions, for the purpose of offsetting the impact that the wind project will have on Loyalist Township, particularly Amherst Island and its residents. So that is still in the agreement.
And
so there is an intent there. I would agree with Joan that this is still a point.
Yeah, and I'm not arguing that point whatsoever. The other thing that was mentioned, if I remember correctly, was that like some people on the mainland didn't like, they thought it obstructed their view as well, and the lights and everything else. And that's taking it down a whole nother path and an argument that we don't have to have here tonight. But that was the thought process. Now there's, and I guess from my own point of view, I have, there's a couple of ways of doing this. We can put it right in the policy that just like this, first 5 years allotted to Amherst Island. There's also an application that's going to be coming. We're going to be preparing an application that each applicant fills out, and quite often applications that come in, there's a scoring to them. And so it can also be dealt with in the scoring process. So there's other ways of possibly coming up with the same result, just without it being the first 5 years goes to them. And I'm just mentioning that just for thought, that's all. Joan, go ahead.
So obviously I like your first suggestion, going back to 5 years for Amherst Island. Obviously I would like that. I think the application can happen after that, and preference be given at that point. I'm still very disappointed when they have an example of how it was doled out in one ward, that they would take it upon that they don't think it's fair for the other ward is all I'm saying. And yes, I know they said they had hardships, but I can also say that residents of Amherst Island had graver hardships than the mainland.
I'm not about to dispute any of that statement, John. Yes, Diane?
And I would add that that's still continuing for some people who, I don't want to get into that discussion, but actually have had to relocate to Kingston because of sound problems. So I think that that's not appreciated on the mainland. And it's not happily appreciated by everyone here either. But I think if we are ever going to, I think one thing that everyone on Amherst Island can agree to is that Amherst Island should benefit directly from some of these funds. Maybe 5 years isn't right, but I'm not going to change from that. But maybe that, I guess I was interested in hearing what other options council considered. And Jim, you've given one. Are there any other?
Well, I mean, the sky's the limit for options. Basically, it's whatever we can come up with. But I mean, we can look at it, trying to do it through other methods. We can change the number from 5. We can go back with whatever the committee recommends. We can go back with 5 and say, no, we still think that's right. My only concern with that is if we go back and say, no, we don't agree and we don't want it changed, they may just set the value for us. So if we can come back with a suggestion, then we can start, at least we're bringing the discussion to them. Bill, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, just one thought. Well, one clarification. I think it's important when we talk about the first 5 years in that we're not speaking of the entire pod. It's the wind electric portion, since there is the solar, just for whenever we make the recommendation, that's clear. And I think one way that maybe another way of achieving the first 5 years is not to say, so for example, if we take in our method of spend 75, bank 25, so looking at that chart, that's basically about $400,000 a year from wind electric would be spent. So maybe we just say we guarantee at least $2 million would be spent on Amherst Island. Whether that's over 10 years, 15 years, that's still the equivalent of 5 years. I don't know if those are kind of options council was saying, so that you're guaranteed. Doesn't mean it has to be all the first 5 years, 100%, but you are kind of locking in. It's kind of the equivalent of the first 5 years, but it doesn't have to happen in the first 5. I think those were some of the options of maybe of getting to that number without just saying necessarily the first 5. So I mean, that's just one idea, but it could be, you could lock in the equivalent amount of the first 5 years, but it doesn't mean it has to be all spent in the first 5.
Thank you, Phil.
Suggestion.
Good point.
I
Yes,
think it's an excellent point. If I may speak, I think it's an excellent point, and I think that because all of the money might not need to be spent on Amherst Island in the first 5 years, so there needs. I would never think that the equivalent be allocated 5 years. That amount be allocated, but not that it be spent in the first 5 years, because Amherst Island, like every other place, has a long-term need for money. We don't want to spend it all. I mean, I'm suggesting it would not be proper to spend it all in the first 5 years.
And, there again, I guess in my mind, I kind of had assumed once again, I guess, that it was the allotment of equivalent to the first 5 years. But the way that it's written, it sounds like the first 5 years, the money goes. So maybe just rewording it and clarification that we can take it back to council that way too.
I think that's a pretty fair way to do it. And it's also a good point that you may not need it on the first 5, where I think we definitely did word it as the first 5 years. And the solar project, it is in the agreement worded as the first 5 years. But we're a few years into that one already, right?
Yeah.
So like, yeah, it could just be the equivalent money amount. I think that'd be probably the best option.
Okay. Joan, go ahead.
I agree with that, as long as it's the same amount of money is allocated. I agree with
Okay. Well, that might be an easy fix.
that.
Okay, so it sounds like we're kind of in the same, we're all in the same ballpark then with that. If there's other discussion, just let me know. Otherwise, we can move towards a motion. Joan?
I'm just curious if we should have a time limit, not the 20 years, maybe in 10 years, or if that's more feasible.
We could. The other thing, again, I'm looking at trying to figure out what's best by the end of it. Because we've already said that if the money's not spent, it could roll over. That means we would have to word it very carefully that the funds, if that the money that rolled over would still be rolled over in the allotment to Amherst Island. So if we leave it for the full 20 years, once it's gone, once that equivalent is used up, then basically just that part of the policy would be void. If it takes, if the applications come in that it goes quickly, then that's good. If they come in slowly and it takes 15 years for us to be able to say we guaranteed that allotment was used, I just hate to set a time frame on it, and then at the end of the time frame, the allotment wasn't all used. In worst case scenario again. Yes, Joan?
Yes, I agree with that.
Sorry, I'm not trying to be the doomsday person. I'm just trying to think of
No,
everything.
but
go
that
wrong in the
makes
next 20 years.
sense. But if they came in and used that before the 20 years are up, then that's it, then that allotment, then they apply like everybody else at that point.
Then everything is just equal.
Okay. Sounds good.
Yes, Diane? Go ahead.
And Joan just, thank you. Joan just hit on a point that I was about to say as well, that it doesn't mean that, just as it is with the area around the Samsung project, it doesn't mean that money can't be used beyond that 5-year or beyond that amount of money within that area. It just doesn't mean that anything specific is allocated. No specific amount is allocated to that area beyond that amount.
That's right. And again, and maybe Brandy, we can wordsmith it a little bit when the draft policy comes out, but I see it as a minimum. You know, like there will be a minimum of the equivalent of first 5 years. And after that, then yes, it's an open playing field, and every application will be taken on its own merit.
If I could put one more
Yes,
little thing in
James?
there. I think in the application process, you should also have a little part where priority is given to, say, Amherst Island, just in case you have a lot of applications. Say we've got $100,000 available and $500,000 worth of applications comes in. Well, since the first 5 years allocation is set up for Amherst Island or around the solar farm area, I think those projects should be given priority until the money is used up. Just because if they technically have allocated funds and then they can't get them until, like, say, year 19, that's not the intent of what we're trying to do. And correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what I was thinking.
Yeah. No, good point. Good point. Okay, good. There any other questions or discussion? If not, if someone wants to make a motion to the effect of what we've Joan, go ahead.
I will try to make a motion. I've never done it before, so I make a motion that, I don't know what I'm supposed to say here. The equivalent of 5-year funds be allocated over the 20 years with a preference to Amherst Island and the solar projects when applications are received.
Okay,
Feel free to fine tune that.
okay. Diane? Diane, go ahead.
Joan, would the mover consider that the equivalent of 5 years be allocated to Amherst Island over a 10-year period? To put a line on, just going back to what I was saying earlier on, there are a lot of demands right now, and obviously if there aren't good projects, then that would roll over. But anyway, that's just fine tuning what Joan is saying a little bit.
Go ahead, Joan.
I like the way James worded it as far as just like we didn't want 10 years. Is that not correct? We discussed that.
Okay. I'm fine with that too.
So,
I just said that with preference given to those areas, so you get first crack at the money essentially. So if you do have projects ready to go, then you can pull the trigger on them like quicker.
so the motion for Brandy's sake, since she's trying to take the minutes and the motions, the motion was, did you get it, Brandy, or do you need us to fine tune it a bit?
So I have that the equivalent of 5 years of funding be allocated over a 20-year period with preference that projects in the area of Amherst Island and the solar project be applications be considered first.
Was that the intent of the first of the mover, Joan?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. And I shoot. Did you second that, Diane, or did you just speak? Did
No,
you
I
just
didn't.
help
I'm still
with it?
trying to
Okay.
figure it out.
Okay. I
Brandy,
knew you
can I
spoke
ask
and then. Sorry, go ahead.
Can I ask the motion to be reread?
Yes. Brandy?
Yep. So that the equivalent of 5 years of funding be allocated over a 20-year period with preference that projects in the area of Amherst Island and the solar project area, with preference that projects in the area of Amherst Island and the solar project be reviewed and considered first. The applications within those areas be reviewed and considered first.
Does that, sorry, Brandy, I just, does that specifically say the, it has the equivalent of the first 5-year value?
That the equivalent of 5 years of funding.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. I want to make sure. Joan, your hand was up.
Perhaps I shouldn't have included the name solar. They have their own funding pot. Is that not correct?
Yes.
At this point. So maybe I shouldn't have added that at this point with this motion that I was making. They should have preference as well, but I just don't know if that needs to be part of this motion.
Diane?
I would second that motion if it only referred to the equivalent of 5 years of the wind electric funds be allocated to projects on Amherst Island. And I guess, you know, over the 20-year period, I guess everyone else agrees with that. But I would object to with preference to, because I think we wanted to make it clear, it's not with preference to projects on Amherst Island, it's to projects on Amherst Island.
So just keep it clear and cut it right there.
That's what I would second if that's what if the mover intends.
And I'm not trying to lead the motion or anything, but if the mover wants to redo her motion, she can. And if a subsequent motion wants to be made, we can always do that as well if we want to try to follow up with anything else. Yes, Joan?
Okay, so I don't know where we're at now. I agree with Diane for sure.
May I
So-
suggest a wording?
Sure.
That the equivalent of 5 years of wind electric funds be allocated to projects on Amherst Island over the 20-year period.
Sounds good to me.
Okay, so before we go any further, Brandy, do
Let's
we-
say as a minimum 5 years, because that would go to Jim's point earlier on that it doesn't eliminate eligibility for other projects at other times.
is that all clear, Brandy? For the minutes? And I guess the other thing is does the mover have to withdraw her first motion in order to be able to make the second? I just want to make sure we're doing it right.
I think if she accepts, has a friendly amendment.
Okay,
I do.
okay, so that's good. So you're good with the wording now then, Brandy, too, with the motion?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So we've got a mover and a seconder.
Before we vote on this,
Yeah.
could I just ask one question?
Okay, I'm just before you do, James, if there's a motion, we can discuss it. We really should. Diane, were you seconding the motion?
Yes, I was.
Diane seconding, so yes, now we can have discussion on it.
Okay. Just I thought we'd added the with preference given to Amherst Island for their first 5 years worth of funding over the 20 years to expedite the application process, I guess. So they got first shot at it. The way it's worded now, like, are we setting aside that money entirely from like a certain amount each year, or that's just where the confusion gets for me, because the way we've worded it now, like, say they want the first 5 years up front, then if the money hasn't been set aside, it doesn't exist yet, right? So yeah, I don't know, that's where my confusion is. Like, I
Yes.
agree that 5 years worth of money should definitely go there, but it's just how it's allocated.
Mhm. Okay,
Anybody's got ideas?
Diane?
Would it be clear, I think that's a good point, James, would it be clearer if it said, you know, what we've already said, but with preference being given to Amherst Island, the projects on Amherst Island in the first, I don't know, 10 years or whatever. So it means that, I don't know, is that what you meant, James?
Yeah, but I wouldn't even limit it to 10 years, because say at year 15, if you've still got unspent money, you should still get first crack at it, I think, in my mind. So yeah,
Just,
I don't know what everybody else feels, but
I'm wondering if that's going to be confusing going forward, because we're stipulating that the equivalent value of the first 5 years would be spent on Amherst Island over the life of the project. Then if we follow up with preference would be made for Amherst Island, now basically we're saying that for the entire length of the project, if everything on Amherst Island would get preference. So I think unless
Just
we
2 million. though.
unless we clarify it or something, I'm just struggling with the wording of it. Joan? Go ahead, Joan.
Okay, so I'm not quite sure exactly how the motion reads that I put out there. Can Brandy reread that
Yes, Brandy?
if it's not too late?
No.
So with Diane's friendly amendment, this is what I have. That the equivalent value of 5 years of wind electric funds be allocated over 20-year period to Amherst Island.
Okay, Joan?
Yes, yeah,
Okay,
thank you.
thank you. Diane?
My understanding was that minimum was in there.
The minimum value?
Yes, the minimum, or we could say as a minimum, the equivalent of 5 years of wind electric funds be allocated to projects on Amherst Island over a 20-year period.
And to keep it clean and I'm just asking a question here. The motion that is made right now is very clear. Would it be, would the committee entertain proceeding with discussion and a vote on that, and then a subsequent motion that once those funds are completed, or a part B, that once the 5-year equivalent is the allocation is used, applications would be, because I think the discussion we had was that once that money is done, then the whole township would be basically at par. The Samsung project area would have their allotment, Amherst Island would have theirs, and then everything is, so that's where I'm looking at. If we add anything to what we've got there now, I'm afraid that it could be interpreted in the future that for the life of the project.
If I could interject here for a second.
Yes.
I agree with that. That's just what I wrote down. You read my mind. I guess great minds think alike, eh?
We'll go with it.
Yeah. But so on the end of that policy that we've got wrote so far, I would say with preference given to Amherst Island in the semi-annual application process until the money is used up, until the
Until the 5-year
first 5
allocation.
years worth of money is used up. That would
Okay,
end it.
That's clear. Is that the intent of what you were, the mover and seconder, is that the intent of what you were aiming for?
Are you talking to me?
Yes, sorry. Yes, Joan and Diane.
Yes, however, it has to be written to be clear that that amount of money goes to Amherst Island over the course of the 20 years, and applicants, like James said, coming in from the island would have a preference up until that money is spent, and then they're in the pot with everybody else.
Okay,
If that,
perfect. Diane? Perfect, okay.
I second that.
Yes, Brandy?
I'm sure
I
Brandy can word it.
Can I just read that so everyone's on the same page?
Please
that
do.
That the equivalent value of 5 years of wind electric funds be allocated over 20-year period to Amherst Island until funds are used up.
Until the 5-year equivalent allotment is used. Is that?
and then we go in as everybody
then
else.
And then everything's equal. Okay.
Yes, and then everything's equal, right?
I think that's clear. I like that. Sorry, just my 2 cents.
The seconder likes it too.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so we're clear on the motion. We've got it moved and seconded. Any further discussion on it then? Seeing none, I'll call the motion. Call the question. Sorry, everyone in favor?
Yep.
Motion is carried. Thank you. We went in circles a little bit, but we got it, I think. Okay, so that's all of the items on the agenda under item 6. So correspondence, we don't have any correspondence, announcements and inquiries. I don't, does anyone? We probably, that's one more for a council meeting, but if there is. The one inquiry that I was going to make under this, I guess, would be, would everybody be willing to try to set like the next 2 dates for meetings? And maybe we can come up with a bit of a work plan for those next 2 meetings to try to maximize our time. And if so, I'm just going to put out there right from the beginning that the end of January is budget time for council. The last, I don't have my meeting dates in front of me, but basically from about the 20th of January till February 1st, we have a lot of reading and meetings. Phil, go ahead.
The committee of the whole budget dates are the 25th, 28th, and possibly Monday, February 1st. That's
Monday,
okay.
February 1st. Okay.
Yeah.
So I guess when I move back, I figured by the time I get my budget package and prepare, I'm not an accountant, so it takes a lot of reading and a lot of studying.
You'll get it the morning of the 25th, Jim.
Yeah, thank you. I'll be well prepared then. What I was thinking is if we could stay away from the 20th to the February 1st. And also the other thing I was thinking is by the time we take Christmas and New Year's out, if we hold it before the budget meetings, that only gives staff a couple weeks to prepare. So I'm going to throw this out there that I was thinking of maybe February, like in the first week of February. I'm just trying to find my calendar again here. Sorry, my computer.
I believe the
computer-
1st is the Monday, so
I think I was kind of thinking like that Thursday, like even the 4th or something, and then maybe tentatively near the end, I think was like a 25th or something of February.
So far, I'm pretty wide open in February, so.
Yeah.
Sounds
so
good to me.
I was just throwing those 2 dates out as for consider to start the conversation. And if everybody's agreeable that we can set those, if something comes up, it can always be changed, but we can set that so that we have a plan. Diane?
Jim, are you talking about February the 4th and February the 25th?
That's what yeah, those are the dates that I just threw out.
I'm okay
So-
with those dates.
Okay.
I
so
have
it
a
looks,
question though.
yeah,
I have a
yes.
question before. Are these recommendations that we made right now going to go to council before then?
That was not my intent. If it's the intent of the committee, then we can. I'll tell you what my thoughts were, Diane.
Okay.
The next meeting, what I was thinking is we've before we went to council last time, we kind of came up with a policy model that we wanted, gleaning from the other 2 policies that we were using, Blue Water and I lost it.
Yeah.
The other ones. And now the items that council wanted us to review, we have. So what I was going to suggest is maybe for the February 4th, if Brandy could take everything that we've done so far and basically come up with a draft policy for us to review. We can review it, make sure we're comfortable with it. And it would be nice if it was done by the 4th so that we could have it. But if not, have the application, a draft application, because if we don't have something in front of us, I think if we have something in front of us, then we'd be able to look at it and what we like, we don't like, what we want to change, but it gives us a starting point. So on the 4th, make sure the policy, we're good with the policy. we can start into an application if it's available. And the 25th would basically, it would be nice if at the end of the 25th on the meeting, we would have the policy, draft policy, and application to go to council. Yes, Diane?
That sounds very good to me.
It's a little ambitious, but I think we can do it as long, and that's why I was trying to make sure staff wasn't overloaded during budget as well.
If staff can do it, I think the committee can.
That sound reasonable? Joan's shaking her head. Good. Brandy, is that okay with what that works for you? Okay. And if, like I said, if it ends up and with the application, we've got some staff that are excellent at doing these types of things. And I was hoping that with that amount of time, I'll be able to glean some of their knowledge as well. They're much better at it than I am. Okay, good. So that'll be that's a bit of a work plan and our goal for meeting dates. Is there anything else that anyone wanted to?
I got a question.
Yes.
The next meeting, are we planning for another Zoom meeting?
Until further notice, yes, unfortunately.
I think I actually like it because you don't even have to leave the house. It's great.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it has its benefits. I still like the in-person where you can feel the vibe. But this is a good way to get the business done that we have to do. And as long as everybody's okay with it, I'm thinking that by the end of February, we're still going to be in Zoom land. So, well, that's what we'll just plan on. Okay, if there's nothing else, I would entertain a recommendation for adjournment.
I'll move that we adjourn. It's been a good
Moved
meeting. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Sounds
Moved
good.
by
Thanks.
Diane, seconded by
Thank you.
James.
Yeah.
I'll call the question, and this is one that I'm sure we're going to really fight over. I'll ask the question. All in favor?
Yep.
Motion carried. And we are adjourned. Thank you very much. I
Thank you,
agree.
staff.
Very good meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Have a great holiday.
Yeah,
You
you
too.
too.